or we'll also have a Q&A session, like section or part at the end of the end of the session.
I've just hit record, so we're going to start recording the session now anyway. Mohammed, what's your view? Shall we get started? Because we're already 4 minutes into the session. I think we probably should make a start. What do you feel?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, all right. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put my video off. I just want to move my boxes over here so that they're not actually in the way of anything on the screen. Bear with me just for 1 second. I'll stop my video. Okay, all right. Mohammed, please do interrupt with any questions, or if for any reason you can't hear or you yourself have a question. Okay?
Thanks,
all
Rachel.
Right, then we'll get going. So welcome again, everybody. I'm sorry we're starting slightly late due to technical problems that seem to be expected these days. But welcome to this session looking at strategies for language skills development. And in this week's session, we're looking specifically at reading and writing because they are so crucial, particularly to our students in terms of academic skills, developing their academic skills. So this is how I'd like the session to pan out. We'll start by looking at the context within which we teach and the good practice principles that really underpin everything we're doing with our students and ensure that they get the best from us and we help them get the best from themselves as well. So we'll have a quick look at that, and then we'll move on to look at reading and writing skills in terms of the academic requirements, the specifics of those skills, what students need to learn themselves, and what strategies we as teachers can employ to support that learning. Okay, so that's where we're heading. And in terms of the context, as I say, this is really the teaching context and the elements that we as teachers need to bring to the classroom or the lecture hall in order to support our students in learning effectively. So these are the things I'd like to talk a little bit about. And I know they're not going to be new to you. You know about these things. I'm simply reiterating them as the foundation for what we're going to go on to talk about today. Because without these aspects of our teaching, we can't be as effective and we can't support our students successfully. So obviously, in terms of environments, we're talking about creating the right conditions for our students to learn in whatever setting that may be. You know your own settings, you know where you teach from and how you utilize the environment. But it behoves us as teachers just to have a thought in our mind about whether the environment is conducive to learning, is it friendly, is it non-threatening, supportive for our students. So it's an awareness for us to have of that, and an awareness that some of our students could feel intimidated or nervous or unsure of themselves in a learning situation. So we need to make the environment as supportive and inclusive as we possibly can. So it goes without saying, the next point is the quality of our teaching, which obviously, as I say, it goes without saying that needs to be, and is, I'm sure, high caliber, high quality teaching. Now, I've put the relationship on here for a number of reasons, partly because sometimes we can forget, sometimes we can maybe begin our lessons by establishing a rapport with our students and a great relationship, and then some lessons shift a little bit from that into the business of the lesson, if you like. But it is important that we are, again, always mindful of that relationship, and that we always have in mind that our students need to know, basically, that we value them as people as well as learners, if you like, and that we are there for them, we're there to support them, and there is that rapport between us and our students, that they can relate to us. So just a little tick of a reminder about that, really. We're very good at icebreakers and warm-ups and everything at the beginning of lessons, but then sometimes it does become a little bit more business-like, as I say. Obviously, monitoring is really important for our students in terms of the feedback that they get from us about their progress, about how well they're doing, about areas where they may need extra support. So it's monitoring from us, and it's also encouraging monitoring from our students as well, because self-assessment on their part is a very valuable part of this relationship, a very valuable part of lessons and learning. And this is something that we teach our students to do more and more autonomously when we're moving into the realms of English for academic purposes. So that monitoring on both sides, us feeding into the students and also the students self-evaluating and then maybe feeding back to us about any concerns. So that's a very dynamic process as well. And that really leads on to the whole idea of collaboration with our students. The lesson, the learning process is centered on collaboration. We don't, back in the day, it used to be far more didactic and lessons were delivered. And now the whole process is dynamic and it's two-way and it's about a collaboration. And quite frankly, that's what makes our lessons exciting and interesting and stimulating to be in. So that element is an important element to underpin the way that we present our lessons and the way we work with our students. Tailoring is also relevant because students are not a one-size-fits-all product. Students are very different. We're going to look in a moment at different learning styles. And so it's a really hard balance sometimes for teachers to make sure they do reach all the students in a large group, given the diversity of the students' needs and the students' preferred learning styles. So that, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we see in plenty of our textbooks lots of different activity types that include listening, include reading, include speaking, and so on, role plays, pair work, group work, so that we try to address all those different learning styles successfully. So it's about being aware of our students and their own needs and tailoring lessons and our lesson delivery, if you like, to them so that we can successfully meet their needs. So if we just go on to look at the way that students learn, it's like, to me, it's a little bit as if teaching has a lot of layers. And that initial environment context layer is one of them that we have to take into account. This is another one, the learning styles of our students that we have to try to take into account. So essentially 3 main learning styles, as you know, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So this means that some of our students will learn best when supported by something they can see, when the information is presented to them visually in PowerPoints or videos or graphic organizers or whatever. Other students will learn well when they're listening and speaking, and that reiterates the points to them and helps them to engage more deeply with the content and understand it more successfully. And other students, and this still applies to students at our level, I know it's very much more dominant in primary, but kinesthetic, physical-based learning does apply to our students as well, particularly things like role-playing. But also, I was quite interested in this particular graphic to see that walking meetings is included. And I think this is quite relevant for our students. If you think of a time when perhaps you, the parents amongst you, are in your car with a teenager who's not especially communicative, the chances are the car journey will be more of a dialogue. There'll be more coming from your teenager, because somehow that situation where you're not sitting directly looking at each other, where you're side by side, can be very productive and very successful in supporting students in overcoming that little bit of resistance to disclose something or ask a question or say something they think might sound silly. And that's also the case in our lessons. So I actually do encourage teachers to use walking meetings sometimes. It doesn't have to be a meeting as such, but a pair of students can walk around to discuss the situation, to share their views, to work out a strategy together. And as I say, sometimes that side-to-side kind of scenario works very well and can be very productive. In amongst this as well, there's also the fact that some learners are better when they're learning alone, and some learners are better in groups. So again, we as teachers are having to keep all these things in our mind whilst actually delivering the core content of a lesson and helping to develop the content learning and specific learning as such. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. So when our students are in this situation where they're looking at academic skills, they need a good set of soft skills. And these are the sorts of things that we're looking to help our students develop as their soft skills, as the skills that are going to support them in their learning and development. So they need to be able to plan. They need to find ways to understand. And when I say find ways to understand, we will talk about some strategies that can help them to engage more deeply in the content that they're trying to learn. Our students in a reading situation, our students need active reading strategies. Again, where they can get this deep engagement with the content so that it has some meaning for them and they gain an understanding about it, how it's structured, what it's trying to convey, and so forth. In terms of writing, our students need summarizing strategies as well, so that they can get the main messages from about what they want to say. Similarly with reading, so they can take the main messages from a piece of text. Questioning strategies for me are critical. Questioning strategies are one of the fundamental things that will help our students to shift to that academic viewpoint, where they are encountering different types of text and different types of written content. Because if they question enough, they begin to understand what the purpose of that content is, why it's been written, who it's been written for, what it's trying to say, where the information came from, and so forth. So we do come back to questioning a few times. As I say, collaboration strategies in terms of the students working together, sharing information, sharing viewpoints, sharing their own personal strategies for learning. And for those students who do learn well visually, visualization strategies, helping memory retention, maybe things again like graphic organizers and so forth, to present information in a different way that's more easy for a visual learner to relate to. So those are all the soft skills that our students need and that we will be helping to provide them with in order for them to make the most gain in learning the academic skills of reading and writing. Okay, so let's move on to reading and writing skills. And the reason I put the picture of a juggler there is because I do see sometimes that we as teachers are juggling so many things. The things we've talked about in terms of the context, the environment, the learners, learning styles, and so on and so forth. And then on top of that, we have this layer of skills teaching. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us. So in here, I'm asking you to say what the missing word is, how reading feeds my writing habits. And for the purposes of this session, the missing word is obviously academic, because academic reading feeds the writing habit for academic writing. We know that the best writers are often the most avid readers, if you like. But the more that students read around the topic, and the more that they read academic texts with academic language and structured in a way that's relevant to academic text, the better they're going to be at writing, which is obviously, as you know, why we put those two skills together. The receptive skill of reading, which feeds in to the productive skill of writing. So that's how it pans out for the students. They'll be reading text from many, many different sources. They'll encounter different vocabulary, different language, different styles, and all that obviously better prepares them for when they're asked to produce those texts themselves in their writing lessons. So basically what we're saying, when students get to the level of learning academic skills, is that they're going to be really seriously engaging with new ideas. They'll need to reflect on them. They'll need to analyze them, critique them, make connections, draw conclusions. And they have to find lots of different new ways about thinking of a subject. So it's a challenge for us as teachers, but it's a tall order for our students as well. So let's just have a look at reading skills. This is the sort of thing you're likely to have seen in a general English course. These are the sorts of skills that students coming into an English for academic purposes setting, where they need to develop their skills more fully, these are the sorts of skills they're likely to have already done and developed in respect of reading. So then on top of that, we have this layer of academic reading skills, where they're going to be doing things like anticipating content and asking questions. We come back to questions again, it's critical. They might be reading or creating paragraph headings. They might be making assumptions or questioning assumptions about the author of the written text. And they may be reading in order to make notes in preparation for writing. And they may need to recall the contents of what they've read, and they may need to create some sort of mental picture of the whole text that they've read so that they can understand and take those main messages. In addition, our students need to have critical reading and thinking skills, where that integration with the text and the content is even deeper. And this is a really important part of their learning, and it's a skill that they'll use elsewhere as well. But in respect of reading, we really need to help our students learn that skill so that they can understand the significance of the text, they can interpret information from the text, and they can be discerning in terms of how they understand the text, what they take from it, and how they utilize that information, if you like. Okay, so some of the things that we want our students to be able to do in general terms, if we home in for a moment on reading, these are some of the basic learning objectives that we want to give our students. We want them to be able to do these things. We want them to, first of all, and very fundamentally, understand the expectations for reading assignments in college courses. And there's a whole piece in skills development about students understanding the expectations that are made of them. If they don't understand what's expected of them, it's very unfair of us to hope that they'll succeed. They have to have clear parameters and clear guidelines. So that whole thing about understanding expectations is very central. They also need to understand and apply their own strategies to complete college level reading assignments, to complete them effectively. And this is where we can again help them in determining which strategies work best for them as individuals. And that comes back to their learning styles and how we can support that, how we can help them to scaffold that themselves so that they get the most effective learning strategies for them when it comes to this particular content. We need to develop them, to help our students to develop those deep reading skills that we alluded to before, where they can think very critically about the information, not always just accepting it without question, but really analyzing it, really thinking, is this fact, is this opinion, where's it from, and so on and so forth. And again, as a general strategy for our students at this level, we need them to take responsibility for managing their own work and for managing their own time. They have to become more autonomous learners. They have to be able to structure their learning patterns and their study patterns, make sure they get everything done in time, make sure they've allowed enough time, because they're no longer being spoon-fed with all that information, as they will have been probably throughout high school, in fact. So what do we do as teachers to develop reading skills? This, I'm sure, will be familiar to you, because this is a very common, solid, tried and testing approach that we tend to use with our students in a reading context to help them develop their reading skills. So we engage the student with the content, and we're going to look at some examples, but you will see that very, very often imagery is used for that. Imagery, pictures that the students can have an opinion on. They might be familiar with the scenarios in the pictures and so forth. So straight away, if we engage the student with the topic and we get them discussing it and sharing their views, they feel, oh, okay, my opinion matters. I can talk about this. I've got something to say, and you're already on an upward trajectory, if you like, with them once they've started that engagement. Then this whole aspect of front loading, which we'll touch on again later, pre-teach the new vocabulary. Your students will be taught to go and look at a fresh, unseen piece of text, and they will be able to work out some of the words, unknown words, from the context. And that's fine. And that's a reading skill that we will develop with our students. It's a really important skill. But at the same time, if we front load and we pre-teach some of that new vocabulary, we're giving them, if you like, a stepping stone to go into that unseen text, armed with a little bit of equipment, with a few tools, so they can be helped to understand it. Often there'll be a focus question directed to the topic of the text or opinions around it, or how this text is relevant to modern society or whatever. So all that's the kind of run-in, the pre-reading, the before you read section of the reading process, which tends to be a 3-stage process: before, during, and after the reading. So there in the middle, the students read, and you will have seen in many, many books, most books probably, that the thing that happens after the students have read is that we ask them questions about what they read, to check understanding, to check that they've got a good grasp of exactly what the text was about, what the text concluded, what information it presented, and why. And then there'll be a task and maybe another follow-up activity after that. So it's very structured, the approach that we suggest for our students, and it's scaffolded to support them in engaging with the text and being successful. The thing about academic reading that makes it different from what our students have seen before is that where they might have read less academic content, they are now coming in to read content that's complex, that's organized in a hierarchical way, and they need to apply some strategies to be successful with that. So we'll take a look at some examples in textbooks of how we guide students through reading tasks. This is from a general English book. This is not an EAP, English for Academic Purposes book. This is from Elevate, which is one of the McGraw Hill general English course. But you still can see that we use that 3-stage process for reading. We still look at the before reading element where we're using pictures to engage with students, thinking about what are their jobs, what are their responsibilities. Then the students will go on to read. And then after the reading here, you see that there are questions to check understanding and another task about making a list of summer jobs they'd like to do. So personalizing about the topic of the reading text to again help it to mean something to the students, help it to support understanding and so forth. Okay. I'm not going to go into writing. I won't go into writing. We'll look at that after our visit. So this is a page, or in fact, a lesson we'll look at from New Interactions, which is another McGraw Hill course, but it is an English for Academic Purposes course. So this is more, you'll see it's more structured. It's more detailed about the skills. It's more explicit. The skills, just to pop back for a second, the word skills here, making inference and using context clues. And no, not writing again. I can't resist going on to writing, sorry. So there was a skill there, but there were just a couple of hints about that skill. And that's the level of support you would expect in a general English course. But when we go into a course that is for academic purposes, then you're looking at more detail. And you're looking at the lesson being longer and more sophisticated, if you like. So there is a before you read section. And again, pictures to engage the students and asking them to share their views, brainstorm ideas, feelings, words, and phrases. Then that front-loading element, where we give the students some vocabulary that's going to be relevant, because this is vocabulary they will see, they will encounter when they read this text. And here, the same skill actually, to some extent, getting the topic from titles and headings. So there's a skills focus, explaining that skill to them. And then they go on and they read the text, quite a long text. Then a strategy on how to summarize a paragraph, and then some practice on that. So all the time, it's going further into the text, looking in more depth at the structure of the text and the purpose of the text and how it's all put together. And then, and after you read a section here with some questions that they can answer and discuss. So again, transposing the information from the reading text so that they can use that information themselves. They've internalized it, they've understood it, and then they re-express it in a different context. Okay. And again, some more skills focused, this was the one, getting meaning from context and information. That was a similar one, sorry, to the general English course. And a strategy explaining, not just telling them to do that, but a detailed strategy explaining how and giving examples, and then to practice that. So all the time, when we're trying to support students with reading, we're getting them to go deeper into the text, and then we're getting them to kind of use the information they've gained from that and apply it, or the skill they've gained, and apply it somewhere else, again, to reinforce it, to help them to remember it. So there's two examples here where they're going to apply the particular reading skill that they've been working on in this lesson. So as I was saying before, it's hard for students with academic text because they're so different from what they're used to. One of the common strategies for helping students when they're reading, when they're trying to develop reading skills, is the SQ3R strategy, which I'm sure some of you will know and will have heard of. But I wanted to share a graphic with you about this, because I find this particular graphic is not only useful for us in terms of understanding the process of reading. This is a really useful graphic for our students because it tells you the how and the why. So the SQ3R, the S and the Q are for survey and question, and the 3 R's in this process are read, recite, review. And I actually, personally, I would add a 4th R, reflect, but we'll get to that in a minute. So this graphic, if you did want to use it with your students, explains things very clearly as to how they should do the skills that will help them to become better and more effective at deep reading. How they should do them, like looking at the material, reading the summary, breaking the reading into chunks, saying it out loud in their own words. But it tells them also why they should do those things. And students really do benefit when we don't just tell them how to do something, but we tell them why. So I would encourage you, I've put the source down at the bottom here, it's from Oregon State University, but I would encourage you to share this or something very similar with your students to give them that extra bit of context and scaffolding around what we're trying to do, which is help them improve their reading skills. Okay, so just to sum up on the strategies that we can apply in lessons with our students to try to get that deeper level of engagement where our students feel skilled to deal with a reading test, skilled to analyze it, work out ways of understanding it and use the information. Front loading, we talked about in terms of providing prior knowledge, prior vocabulary and so forth to prepare them for the text. Ask questions. If our students ask deep questions about a text, they are going to benefit because that whole approach, that whole questioning approach is a good thing for them to have. The more they dig, the more they delve behind the text they see, the more engagement they'll have with that text, and the better they'll understand it in general. I would also, and I have said to many students, read anything you can get your hands on. Not just academic stuff, but just to read, so that constantly they're using that skill, they're developing that skill in different ways. It's good if your students can group learn, can read together, can have reading logs where they read and they share their ideas, because that'll help them to get new perspectives that the individuals hadn't necessarily thought of. And reading logs and book clubs can also help students to share ideas for different types of learners. Or what one student might say, I did a mind map of this, and they might show it in the group, and that really might help a visual student who loves to see information presented in that kind of way. So those sorts of strategies where students are questioning, where they're reading widely, where they're sharing their ideas, will all support them in developing their reading skills. Now, just to move on and look at writing, what's wrong with this was the question I posed about this picture. And in essence, there's nothing wrong with it, teaching, writing and reading together. I would have put it the other way around, because to my mind, it's the reading, the receptive skill of reading that feeds into the productive skill of writing. So to me, that's a bit illogical. And I would have said teaching, reading and writing together, because that is the way that we do it in skills books when we're trying to support skills development. Okay. So in terms of academic writing, again, it's vastly different from what our students are used to when they've been going through high school. Okay, so here's some of the do's and don'ts. They're generalizations. And again, this might be something that you would like to share with your students because it's a visual summary and it just clarifies some of the differences for them between academic style writing and that more generic high school type writing that they're likely to know about. So for example, no idioms, no colloquialisms, not constantly repeating words, not so much use of personal adverbs in academic writing, no contractions. So it's a more formal style of writing. These things are all important in terms of academic writing, that there's likely to be passive structures, there's likely to be a need for referencing, citations, more complex grammar structures than they're used to. Tentative language sometimes if the academic writing includes proposing a theory, suggesting an idea, a hypothesis or whatever, but also precise facts and so forth in academic writing, where students have done their research, they've collected the facts from a piece of research and they're going to be writing about that. So it's massively different from what they're used to. The language is likely to be more sophisticated, it's not flowery, unlikely to be humorous or frivolous or whatever. It's altogether a more serious business. So where we looked at the things, the objectives for our students in relation to reading, there are also objectives that the students need to acquire in relation to writing. And again, I start with that thing about expectations, because it is so very important that our students understand the expectations for their writing assignments. They have to have those clear parameters and they have to understand what's expected of them and ideally why it's expected of them. That gives them, that channels them in the right direction, if you like, and it will inform and guide the way that they tackle a piece of writing. So that's the bottom line. That's the first thing they need to know. They do need to know that their style of writing and their approach is important. They need to watch out for coherence and cohesion, and those factors that we saw in the previous slide, that are important because they are features of academic writing. They need to be aware of that. They need to build up their personal repertoire in terms of those things. the students need to recognize specific types of writing assignments that they're likely to encounter in the courses that you're teaching. So it's good even at the beginning of a course to give them that kind of explanation about what's coming up in the semester, what's coming up in the year, what they're going to encounter, and how it's different from what they're used to so far. As we mentioned in the previous slide, grammar resources and vocabulary as well will be different, and our students need to learn how to use their language, the English language, in academic writing, so that they can structure their writing in the right way, in the correct way. And back to learning styles, we should be helping our students, if we can, find out what specific strategies for writing work best for them as individuals. And of course, that relates again to their learning styles and the sorts of things that they find helpful when they're trying to learn, get their head around something. So those are what they need, what we need to guide them and support them towards. And this again is a common way to approach writing tasks in an academic setting. Now, I'm going to start with the front loading again, but we've already talked about that in relation to reading. So providing students with words and structures, in this case, grammar structures that might be more helpful to them in an academic writing situation, like, for example, indirect questions, maybe, although not ideal. But first and foremost, treat writing as a process. Our students may have done this to some extent in high school, but it's much more prevalent and more significant in academic writing, because that will be the way, by developing the process, that they will develop their skills, and that they will get a deeper understanding of what is required, how they can achieve it, and more to the point, how they can achieve it successfully. So treat writing as a process, which consists of brainstorming and information gathering and information sharing, moves on to writing notes, and then moves on to doing different drafts of a piece of written work until they can finalize it. And you'll see when we look at the books that the drafting and reviewing process can also be done as a peer activity as well, where classmates share this process together. Students must think of the audience and the purpose when they're writing anything. And it's again this move towards autonomy, where we need to try to help our students be critical of their own performance, constructively critical of their own performance, so that they can self-evaluate in a meaningful way that will support their development and the development of the skills that they're trying to learn. And this is another really key point, they need an awareness of the marking criteria upon which they're going to be assessed, because that's so relevant in terms of their achievements, their final achievements, if they're going to take an exam, or if they're looking for a particular exit grade or level or mark when they finish the course that they're taking, and so forth. So they need to know what the marking criteria is based on, in terms of response and in terms of lexical resource, grammatical range, all those things, so that they can give it their absolutely best shot and succeed. Okay, so let's look at some of the same books that we looked at before, the general English book for a couple of pages, and then we'll go on and look at an English for academic purposes book, but this time looking at the actual writing section. Now, again, this is writing. They start with a kind of an introductory task here to get students thinking of drawing graphic organizers. So just to get them engaging with the whole idea of graphic organizers and what they are. And there's a little strategy point here about them, what they are and why they're useful. And then they get them to actually use this style of a T chart to form the basics for their writing. Sorry. And then the third exercise is building up to them actually using this information in the T-chart to write an essay of about 120 words. That's exactly the sort of thing you would expect to see in a general English course. So there's some support, there's some allusion to skills and strategies, but it's not in depth, because at the high school level, it's not as critical that they acquire those academic writing skills. So here's another example, again from Elevate, our general English book. And in this one, this is a writing strategy about giving feedback. So when giving feedback to others include positive and negative aspects, it's about really giving constructive feedback and not just making a throwaway comment without any basis. But the same kind of approach, brainstorming details, and then looking at a text to kind of engage with that, which will then give the students support and ideas to do this piece of writing. Okay, so it's nice, it's helpful, it gives strategies, but it doesn't go into as much depth as these lessons will do from New Interactions, our EAP, English for Academic Purposes book. So here you see clearly the whole process. And here the students are looking again at images, sharing their ideas, read the statements and discuss with the partner as to whether you agree or not, why or why not. So quite deep engagement, sharing their opinions already started to generate ideas that could be fodder for what they're writing. And then here they're going to do some recalling from the reading activity. Remember, we say the reading prepares them for the writing. The reading can feed into the writing. So they're thinking back to relevant vocabulary they will already have seen when they were reading in a previous lesson. For me, this is one of the biggest things that can really, really help your students. And it's skills focus here, and it's called free writing. Now, I don't know, and I can't see any of you, so I can't even see if you're nodding your heads, but I don't know if any of you have used free writing. But if you haven't, I absolutely would urge you to do so, because it can be so valuable in giving your students that extra confidence about writing. A lot of my teaching experience proved to me that students struggle with writing. Free writing is where we ask our students to write about a particular thing. We might give them a time frame if we want to, but what we will say to them is start writing, don't stop, don't cross anything else, and don't show it to me, teacher, because they don't need to. With free writing, it is a process that simply gets your students to practice writing. They may make mistakes, but they'll also be building up a certain level of confidence about actually writing. And that's crucial, because they're going to have to do so much of it. Another thing that I would say to students about free writing is I suggest to students that they keep hold of what they've written in their free writing parts, not to show anybody unless they want to, but for them to look back on, because they will see that actually this whole process of free writing has given them has developed their writing skill. They will see the improvements across the pieces of free writing that they might have done over a period of 6 months, say, or whatever. So I would really, really encourage you to utilize that. It's a very handy tool. So going to another writing lesson, let's look back and we'll see again the same thing: pictures, generating ideas, brainstorming. Free writing is also included here. Reading and noticing text features. So again, using information from reading to feed into writing. Okay, here's the reading. So that's what they're going to reflect on and take some information from there to transpose it into their own writing. There's a language focused thing. So again, it's the kind of front loading before they write, giving them some expressions that are likely to be relevant in this specific writing task. So equipping them with that functional language that they need. And then this is an outline of the sorts of things that you can do in terms of peer review. So the students are going to make some notes, words and ideas here. from their brainstorming and their discussions. And then in this particular book, there are 2 stages of peer review where students share their work with a fellow student, and each of them reviews the work they're looking at and gives it back to their classmates. And this is a good one. It's a useful one because it actually gives guidelines. So it gives a nice rubric, a nice structure for the students to use when they're doing this kind of peer review process. And they can do this twice, because each time there will be comments that the student can use to improve their writing a little bit further. Okay, and then eventually they will finalize their writing. And the ideal, of course, as we said earlier on, is that students can ultimately do this themselves and critically self-evaluate their work so that they end up producing a final draft that is their best piece of work. Okay, so the strategies for us, again, in respect of writing, are that front-loading approach where we give information to the students that they will need, but we give it them before they start writing. Journaling is a particularly useful thing for our students. It's a little bit, again, like free writing. It's when they're writing, when there's some personalization to their writing, and again, they don't have to show it to anybody, but just for them, so that they're developing more confidence in the writing process. Even though journaling is not academic writing, it's still the writing process as such. This is something that we saw on the FQ3R sheet that I used earlier on. And in that sheet, it said read aloud. And here we say think aloud. So it's the same thing. It's encouraging the students to talk through their process, to say what they're doing as they make their notes, to try to explain why they're doing that. It's an important thing because sometimes our students don't know what to make notes on. You might see a student reading a piece of academic text. They might be using a highlighting pen to highlight the key features, the key words, or whatever. If they haven't learned how to highlight, how to pick out the key features and the main points and so forth, then that's not going to be a very effective task. So this thinking aloud, where they're explaining what they're doing at each step of the writing process, gives us as teachers some information to work with again, to make sure they've got it right, they're coming from the right place, they're doing it in the right way, they're thinking in the right way. So that's very useful. Similarly, guided writing, when we as teachers can do some writing tasks with the students and explain what we're doing to them. So we're guiding the process. It can be collaborative, they can share ideas, but we're guiding it as a kind of a role model for them when they go on to do the process themselves. Encourage students to experiment. Why shouldn't they experiment with words and different writing styles and different ways of saying the same thing? Rather than our students being frightened of writing, we need to support them in engaging with the language and in knowing that they can use it. They can put a little bit of their personality sometimes into the way that they express certain things. There's no one right way to write anything. And again, back to questions. Encourage them to ask questions, even questions of themselves, and how they're going to approach a piece of writing and why they're going to approach it that way and what information they want to convey and how they're going to convey it and so forth. And also, as with reading, the benefits of working in a group and sharing their findings and having that dynamic debate so that people's ideas can be broadened by listening to the ideas of their fellow students. So here are some key points in terms of an awareness of our students' needs, an awareness of our students' learning styles, an awareness of maybe their fears, their reluctance, the things they don't feel they're very good at. It's that whole thing. If we have the relationship with our students and we can gain that level of awareness, we are better placed as teachers to be able to support them. Clarity of purpose. To share that clarity of purpose with our students, why they're reading, why they're writing, what's expected and so forth. That's also important in establishing the kind of ground rules. Similarly with assessments. and so that they know the requirements and the marking expectations and everything else. If we can ever give students things that are personally relevant to them, that obviously helps in developing their skills, because wherever they've actually can engage with something on a more personal level, it's going to support them in developing the skill in relation to that thing. We need to do everything we can to encourage them to really integrate deeply with language, with all the elements of language. And that depth of engaging with it is key. It's one of the key things. If we can support them in doing that and stop them from being afraid of language, then I think we're going to make good progress. Now, I've put dissection here as the very last thing I'm going to say. And the reason I put it here is because, in a way, this is contrary to what some people say when they talk about language. But from my perspective, with reading and writing, we need to almost get our students to dissect the language, to take it apart in reading and then when they're thinking about writing, so that they are aware of the parts, aware of the vocabulary, they are aware of the grammar structures, they're aware of the progression, how paragraphs can build on each other, how paragraphs have their own ideas, and the conclusion at the end, the introduction at the beginning. We need our students to understand the interrelationship between the parts in a written text that they read, and then to go on to be able to replicate that relationship and that progression in their writing when they reassemble the parts, if you like. And they make, as I said at the very last point here, they make their own version with new parts because they've become comfortable and confident with the language, and that's where we need them to be, basically. So that's all I've got to say. I can certainly share this with you, and I'm happy to do so. And those are my contact details on the end, should you require anything from me or like to discuss anything. So if there are any questions, we've just got 5 minutes left. If there are any questions, Mohammed, did you see any questions going past your nose?
Yes, actually, thank you, Rachel. I think Ms. Zulfihan has raised her hand, so go ahead, please.
Okay.
If we can, there we go, allowed to talk.
You're on mute, Sophie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, yes. Thank you for the presentation. I'm teaching 111 reading. I have been teaching, okay, so almost we are coming to the end. One thing it became kind of challenge for me, even for the most proficient students, is that I did this activity as a post-reading activity. I took a couple of paragraphs from the reading text, and I put them on the board, and we together annotate the paragraph. What is an argument? What is an explanation? What is an opinion? We annotate that. Then we picked one of the argument or the opinion of the writer as a statement, and then for the most proficient students, I raised the question: to what extent do you agree with that? Then for the less proficient student, I asked, what do you think of it? Think about it. Do you agree? For the most proficient, for them, the first answer was 100%. So that wasn't what, obviously, I explained to what extent do you agree, but the challenge that I want them to write a statement for or against. And the PE normal, I don't know, in secondary schools, we developed the idea points, evidence, explanation, exploration. So I want them to write an idea or come up with an idea, either you support, find an evidence from a literature, explain, evaluate that. This challenge took ages. I don't know how far, what we did. This was post-reading activity. I'm not sure how far. They said at the end that we understood what it is, but can they do it or apply that actively? This has been a challenge for me. Like I pick up the points from somewhere in the text, then where do you stand? Kind of question. But it's a bit like, for me now, it's I don't know how much we have done.
Can I ask you then, was this the first time they'd done that activity?
Yeah, for me, the question is, in between, I think, I didn't have time, like, obviously there's material I need to cover. I didn't have much time to develop those in-between skills, how to develop their own ideas there. I only say make your own point, but I don't know how much they know what point is.
Yeah, I think
that is where I'm underlining, dissecting that, but it's just
yeah.
for me.
Oh, you can't, absolutely, Sophie, and you can't just go straight in to dissecting a text. I think with your students, I would take quite a few steps back and start more slowly with giving them some.
Perfect. And dissecting those opinion, ideas, explanation, examples, they are fine. They individually come to the board, they do it. But creating the idea, opposing idea or supporting idea, then finding evidence and those the P points, evidence, explanation, following that. For some, it's kind of okay, but
for some, it's not.
Majority for me is a question. These are my really proficient students coming from the private education.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would be a bit more granular. I would break it down and I would get the students who are less able to do that in a holistic task like you've given them. I would break some of those skills down into little bite-sized pieces for those less proficient students and just build it up gradually. We have to, because it's that foundation and those layers really. And of course some students learn more quickly and they're more able than others, but for the ones that aren't, they need the constituent parts of that skill before they can ever apply the whole thing holistically. So that's really, it will work, but it does have to be more granular for some of the students.
Coming from top down,
but it's great that you do it. It's really good. That's nice.
This is a secondary school system. Well, when I was in UK, so it's, I think, it's not there yet.
Yeah, but they can get there. They can.
Yep, hopefully, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for asking that question. Mohammed, I'm conscious of the time. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Are there any other questions, everyone?
People have gone anyway. Don't think so.
Okay. Well, in this case, thank you very much, Rachel, for the informative. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to join us today. And we will look forward to seeing you in the near future. Well, in this case, it's actually next week. So our next session will be on developing language skills when it comes to listening and speaking.
Yes.
And it will also be delivered by Rachel. Thank you, Rachel, for in advance.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you all next week, and have a lovely evening if you're in Riyadh, Saudi. In the case of Rachel, have a lovely afternoon.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.